Phew. Absolute scorchio in England today. 32 degrees, unheard of. Right, back on this. Now, last video recorded, I got to the mapping component stage using the array map, which I got in JavaScript isolation. But as soon as it came to integrating it into React, I had a bit of a brain fart. But I've gone through all the array stuff. I think it kind of threw me calling an object key into a component. And when I got to this stage, mapping components, as you've seen in the previous video, it mashed my head up a bit and I got a bit disheartened because I didn't get it. But I've persevered. I've watched the lessons again and again, and I get it now. So this is a pretty important lesson to understand, I find, particularly as we're seeing the more dynamic nature of React and the kind of the point of React. So I'm going to go through it now and try and explain it to anyone else who may have been struggling. Maybe it's just me that's being a bit of a thicko. So let's get the vid back on. Mapping components, then we're going to go on to the map quiz, cover that, and then on to the loading images for map. Looks quite good, this. I'm looking to the left of my screen and it looks like I'm looking at those tiles, doesn't it? That's a happy accident. Right, let's get going with Bob on the mapping components lesson. What layout do we want? Not that one. Not that one. This one.
Let me walk you through a couple of changes I made to the code that we were just looking at. Of course, you probably noticed I moved all of our hard-coded joke components outside of our component here and just commented them out so we can still reference them. I've also changed our jokes.markdown file into a jokesdata.javascript file. Now, we're not quite ready to make API calls and then make use of the data that comes back, so I'm going to be kind of mimicking that with this jokes.js file that's exporting an array of these joke objects. Over in our app.js, I'm going to import the jokes.
So what he'd created there was an array, and he's importing that into here. That there. That array, which is a bit weird. And that's what kind of threw me because it hasn't got a name. But this is an array that he's making available in this file, the index.js file.
So I'll say jokes data
.js even.
From that file, /.
That's his new array he's created, jokes data.
Jokes data. And we can see that if I console log jokes data, I should get the array of jokes. Okay, great. Now combining what we just learned with .map and with creating an array of JSX elements, I can put those two concepts together. What I'm going to do is create a variable, let's call it joke elements. And this is going to be not an array that I'm defining right now, but instead the array that gets returned when I call jokesdata.map. Inside of my .map, I'm going to take a look.
I'll just pause it there. So just imagine that's not there. Joke. Imagine that's not there, actually. So what he's doing, he's taking all the data from, I think he did this lesson a bit too quick. I think it's probably best to explain it, just to show that I've understood it. So he's taking this data, he's creating a new array, jokes data, which is this. Jokes data, name of the old array. He's creating a map of that into a joke elements array. So essentially, that as it stands, we'll just create a complete copy of the data in jokes data and putting that into the new array that is created there called jokes elements. That's a good fundamental thing to understand. Keep that in your head.
Look at each one of my joke objects and what I can return.
Let's go back to that. This is another key thing to understand
Map.
here.
I'm going to take a look at each one of my joke objects and what I can.
You should really have paused it again then, I think. So this is an arrow function, obviously. And that is an object. So that is saying go through the first object in the array, which is that one. and it's iterating round. It's saying, right, that's the argument, or that's the parameter. Do whatever he's going to do in the function body on that, then do it on that one, then do it on that one, then do it on that one, and then do it on that one. And I don't think using arrow functions kind of makes it clearer. Anyway, sorry, Bob.
Can return, I'll do this on its own line just so we can see a little more clearly what's happening. I'm going to return a joke component. However, I can pass the data from this individual joke object to my joke component. So maybe this is a good opportunity for you to put on your thinking cap and do a quick little challenge. Your challenge is to see if you can pass the props to our joke component in the correct way, and then of course render our joke elements array so that when you're all done, all of our jokes show up on the page again. Pause the screencast and see if you can complete this challenge.
And this was the point when my head was going, what the fuck? I don't know why, but it was. So as I've just broken it down before, so what this is saying, this is a callback function there. So what it's saying is, run this, run the body, run the instructions in this function, call it back, and make a new entry in this array, and go all the way around, go through that one, go around that one, go around that one, go around that one. So it's getting this data. So think of this as kind of a data sock. So for every time it runs, which will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. So this, the body or the instructions in the function, what you have code, this will run 5 times because this is iterating around each object. It's iterating around each one of these objects. It's capturing that data. It's adding that data as props. And it's adding that data as props to the element, and then we're going to call the element and call the main array. But anyway, so what do we want to do? We want to create, see if you can let you pass the necessary props to the joke component in the map. So the joke shows up on the page again. Okay. Pass the necessary props to the joke component. So there's the joke component. We need to pass in these 2 props. So we need to pass in setup and punchline. So that data is available to us here. That parameter. So the first thing it's done, it's gone into there and it's gone, right, add this setup object, add that punchline, object data. So we're going to go, oops, I've done this right, haven't I? So we're going into JSX land, like he always says. Joke dot, we're not called the props, so we need to set the props on this component. So set up equals, and normally we'd hard code that thing in there, but we're taking the data out of jokes element, out of jokes data rather, and we're stuffing it into there, the new array. So that'll be joke setup. That's grabbing that. You see setup, it's getting the data there. That's the key and value pass. That's the key, that's the value. So we're saying get the setup joke, stick it in this prop. On the next one, we need what's it called again? Punchline. In the punchline data, and that is in joke punchline. I mean, this could be anything. We could call that parameter, anything we want, like Dave. Still work. So as I said, let's break this down again. That is a new array that we're creating, joke elements. This is going to map the data from this array, which we're importing there. It's all there. This is going to grab that data and remap it into a brand new array there. And we're going to stuff this array with this object data there. So this is going around each time. It's going, right, return, put this element in there with these props, put this element in there with these props, put this element in there with these props, and so on and so forth. So at the end of it, we should have a joke elements array, and that should be full of these objects. I hope that made sense. It's a hard concept to grasp for a newbie, for an experienced dev even. Right, so let's just console log this to start, just to make sure it's working. Need to go into JavaScript land again, which we do by the squirrely braces. Yeah, that's worked. That's a load of objects. That's what JSX returns, doesn't it? So all we need to do now, something I quite liked, all we need to do is just put the name of the array and it'll print it all. Whereas in React, it'll print it all to the screen. Whereas if you're doing this in JavaScript, it can be right pain in the arse. You've got a for loop round each element in the array. You've got to pick out the index of each array, iterators and all that bollocks. But this is pretty cool. You can just do that, and this should work. If you watch that. Hey, there we go. So I think I finally understand that. So let's move on now to the map quiz. It's not Melon isn't showing the banner, the map quiz lesson. So yeah, I hope that was understood. Let's move on to the next lesson, which was the map quiz. Then we're going to go on to 20 loading images from map. Without further ado, let's get the screen back on. In fact, let's watch Bob do it. He might explain it better than my ramble.
Each of the joke objects that I am looking at inside of my .map is each of these objects that we see here. So they have a setup property and a punchline property, which means over here, I can say my joke has a setup prop, and this has to be spelled exactly this way because our joke component is expecting props.setup. This setup prop will be equal to, and then I need to use my curly braces because I'm leaving JSX and going into JavaScript. We'll say joke.setup. Now it just so happens that I'm using the same name for the prop that I'm passing to my joke component, props.setup, and the object property that I chose in my actual data setup here. However, it's not always going to be the case that these are the same. If, for example, these were question instead, then over in app.js, I would still say setup because I'm the one that gets to choose what the prop name for my component is, but then my actual data would need to change to joke.question. Now, a question doesn't always make sense in this case because they're not all questions, but hopefully that illustrated a point. And next, I will need my punchline. And this is going to be joke.punchline. Again, because the actual data has a punchline property in each of these joke objects. Now I'm not quite done. I can hit save. Nothing's going to show up on the screen, and that's because I'm still returning an empty div in my app component. The last thing I need is just to render my joke elements, hit save, and there we go. We've got all of our jokes back on the page. Now, if I clean some of this up, you can see just how much simpler this makes our lives as React developers. And then if I were being really stingy, I could use the implicit return to just return my joke element. I'm not going to worry too much about that, especially because it makes it a little too wide horizontally there. Awesome. Okay, we have taken a...
Plus, I think that makes it a bit more confusing. Arrow functions aren't particularly intuitive, I find. So, yeah. Take your point there, Bob.
Number of asides. Once again, I'm going to bring us back to our Airbnb experiences clone, and we're going to take this concept and actually build these separate experiences in their own cards. This time, using data that we get from a file instead of hard coding things into our code. Make sure you have studied this and understand it before you move on, and when you're ready, let's jump back into our section project.
I had to study this multiple times. I recommend other people do that. Right, onto the quiz.
We're going to look at the .map array method, read through these questions, click into the editor, type down your answers, and when you're ready, click play and we'll go through the quiz together.
What does the map array method do? It maps the data contained in an existing array to a new one. Is it that simple? What do we usually use map for in React? To pull data from an external source dynamically create page content with this data. Fair enough, innit? What do you think? Keep it simple is my motto, right? Why is the .map method and just creating components manually, guys? Well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? You can't use dynamic content, can you? Means you can use dynamic in your app. Manually typing everything out. Tiresome and tedious. I don't think Bob's going to say that in his answers. Let's find out.
Number one, what does the map array method do? And I'm referring here to JavaScript in general, not specifically React. Well, the array map method takes a function as its parameter, and whatever gets returned from that function will be placed in the same index of method. Takes a function as...
Hang on a minute, I wasn't listening.
do. And I'm referring here to JavaScript in general, not specifically React. Well, the array map method takes a function as its parameter, and whatever gets returned from that function will be placed in the same index of a brand new array. So maybe let's say it returns a new...
Bit more detailed than my answer. So it takes in a function as a parameter, and whatever that function returns, it adds that to the new array, the new index in the array, or data item in the array.
A new array, and whatever gets returned from the callback function provided is placed at the same index in the new array. And well, yeah, that's good enough. Theoretically speaking, our callback function, we could just hard code something like return the string hello, and then we would have an array filled with hellos. But usually what we're trying to do is take items from the original array and modify them in some way. In fact, maybe I'll type that down.
I was about to say, why
With
didn't
that
you
in
say
mind,
that?
number 2 asks, what do we usually use .map for in React? Well, in web applications, it's really common for us to have an array of raw data, usually an array of objects, and to want to turn that array of data into something that's visible on the screen. So in React, we'll take an array of data, we'll map over it, and turn each of those items into some kind of JSX element that gets put on the page. So more concisely, it allows us to convert an array of raw data into an array of JSX elements that can be displayed on the page. And number 3, why is using .map?
Let's just let that sink in. Convert an array of raw data, fair enough, into an array of JSX elements that can be displayed on the page. I like having an almost beard, you can fiddle with it while you're thinking.
.map better than just creating the components manually by typing them out and putting the props in that we want. Using .map in this way is a lot more dry. Obviously, if you think in terms of something like Amazon, every time a new product is uploaded to Amazon and Amazon sells that product, there isn't a developer out there who's going to go copy and paste the elements from a product and then put in different props, let's say. No, instead, the data will change, and using something like .map will automatically convert that raw data into something that gets displayed on the page. One way you could put it, like I wrote here, is that it makes our code more self-sustaining in a way, meaning that it doesn't require additional changes whenever the data also changes. It makes me think of...
You don't need manual intervention to upload the data on the page or the content. You can have that for free, Bob.
When we're typing out a C-style for loop and we say something like for, let I equal 0, and then we use I is less than some array dot length. This makes it so that if the length of the array ever were to change, our for loop would not require intervention. Instead, it would automatically check the length of the array, and that's what it uses in this parameter in the for loop. Alternatively, if I just said something like I is less than 5, but I'm looking through the elements of an array that maybe now has, let's say, 10 elements in it, my for loop is broken and it requires intervention from a programmer. I think you probably understand, so I'm just going to erase this for loop and leave it where it is. Awesome work on this quiz. Hopefully you were able to answer all of these questions. When you're ready, let's move on and start applying what we just learned to our section project.
See, the banner's changed there. Right, last lesson in this video, loading images from map.
I am coming to you from the future again because in the next challenge, for anybody who is following along using Create React App on their local machine instead of following along here in Scrimba, the upcoming challenge might throw you for a bit of a loop, technically speaking. What we're about to do is go back to the Airbnb project and use a data file that includes links to the local images so that you can map over it and display those images as well as the other pieces of data. And you'll see that just kind of works out of the box here in Scrimba. But if you're following along with Create React App, you'll get something that looks more or less like this. Obviously, this is not ideal. The last time that I spoke to using Create React App, I mentioned how it's gently advised against putting any assets inside of the public directory. However, this is an instance where I'm just going to recommend that you put your images inside of your public directory. I'm going to go to the next slide. This has an animated GIF that might take a minute for some people to load. But you can see that what it's doing is it's taking the images directory from the source folder and moving it up into the public folder. The reason I'm recommending doing this is, well, first of all, normally you're not going to have a data file that includes all of the data you need. Instead, you would actually be getting that data from some online resource. And second of all, because it just magically works. When you move the images to the public folder, things just kind of start working again. So that was just a quick heads up for anybody using Create React App. If you're following along here in Scrimba, you really don't have to worry about any of that for now. Okay, with that said, let's jump in.
Right, I'm just going to do this on the next video, I think, because I'm dying for a piss. I've been drinking lots of water because it's roasting. So, yeah, we'll call it a day for now. See you on the next vid. It's that way for goodbye, isn't it?